Ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the briefing room. Yes, indeed, this is year 11 of our webinar series. We're rocking and rolling in 2021. And today I'm very excited to have Looker on the docket, Modern BI as the catalyst for intelligent transformation. And that's a really cool concept. I like this. We all know digital transformation, but what is intelligent transformation? It means you're really thinking through what you're trying to accomplish and you're using intelligence, business intelligence to get the job done. So our speakers today are Josh Parenteau and myself. Josh, of course, is a BI and analytics market intelligence lead over at Google. We're going to be diving into what Looker offers. And first, I'm going to talk about some of the abstract concepts that drive our industry. So I heard this just a couple of weeks ago on a radio show, one of our radio shows. A guy said, we all know that in technology, one more layer of abstraction can solve all of our problems, which is kind of funny, but in many ways, it's very, very real. So I thought we'd take a very quick trip down memory lane and think about the different ways that technology solves these problems and that abstraction can help. So think about virtual machines, right? Way back in the early days of data centers, we had very low use of compute, of CPU. And so that wasn't very efficient. We wasted a lot of money. And then someone came along and figured out they could virtualize machines. So of course, VMware is the leader in that space. But virtualization goes all the way back to the mainframe, way back 40 plus years ago. And what are you doing here? You're really optimizing your infrastructure. You're optimizing the use of your computers, of the actual boxes that get the job done. So virtualization is one of the first layers to abstract away some of the difficulties of dealing with individual boxes, individual processors, and so forth. Well, then the data layer, right? What did we do in the data warehousing movement? We had to pull all this data from operational systems because you couldn't really query the ERP system, could you? It wasn't designed for that. It was designed for operations, for getting things done. So we came up with this concept of an OLAP cube. Oh, actually, this is first we're talking about optimizing cloud, right? So Kubernetes, another wonderful development from Google. Kubernetes really is compute and distributed compute. So you can optimize the cloud. It's really the OS for the cloud is how it's described. And Kubernetes is incredibly powerful. It's a layer of abstraction all the way down at the bottom. So it's really just above the machines in a certain sense. And you're literally distributing compute to different environments. So this obviated the need to worry about whether or not you have written your application for this OS or for that OS, for this browser, for that browser. Really, really powerful, solved all kinds of problems with a layer of abstraction. Well, now the data layer. Let's talk about the data layer. This is a lot older, of course. OLAP cubes have been around for a very long time, and they were designed to optimize analysis, right? So again, back in the data warehousing days, we would pull all this information from ERP systems because they weren't designed for analysis. They were designed for operations. So we pull all this data and we build a cube, which is basically just a smaller version of the warehouse. And you do that for speed because you want to be able to do your queries very, very quickly. I actually did some research for this webinar, and there's an interesting debate going on out there in the data management community about whether or not Google BigQuery kind of obviates the needs for cubes themselves because it's so fast. And the short answer was, well, not yet. But obviously, Google BigQuery as a column store is extremely fast and really solves a lot of these problems. And just to kind of remind us here, the whole issue of optimization deals with performance, right? That's what we're trying to do is optimize the performance, whether it's of analysis or of the infrastructure, the hardware, for example, the different operating systems that you have to touch. The whole idea of these abstraction layers is to be able to optimize what you're doing. Well, if you think about how we got to the data warehousing world and how we're moving now beyond that, you also have these data models, right? So abstraction layers are data models in the data management world. And you've got several of them, not just one. You have a conceptual model, which is your big vision of what you're trying to do. A logical model gets more practical. And then the physical model itself, all the way down to which machines are touched where and so on and so forth, which tables, for example. But that's even that physical layer is an abstraction layer itself, right? Because what you're doing is you're really optimizing how the data performs, how the application performs by fueling it the right data at the right time. All of this stuff is really about performance and getting things done. So this actually photograph I took myself a number of years ago, and that is very granular. It's very tactile. Yes, that is a bullseye inside of a bullseye. I actually saw that happen. So you can get precision, and that's really what you want in these days, especially because of what? Well, the forcing function of COVID. So what happened with COVID is we all got to work from home suddenly, right? Retail operations were predicted to drop 10% or 13% or even higher than that. This is from way back in June. So what does that mean? So let's take the whole concept of intelligent transformation and apply it to the industry of commerce, of retail. Well, think about retail stores. Well, a lot of those had real trouble during this whole pandemic. The small ones, especially, the big ones were allowed to stay open so they could still stick around. But guess what happened? Lots of people started going online to buy their stuff through various e-commerce sites. Well, even an e-commerce website is basically an abstraction layer. It's a layer on top of virtual references to physical assets that are in various places. It used to be that you had to have your own warehouse. You have to ship all your own stuff. Then companies like Amazon came along and optimized that whole process for you. So they abstracted away the inventory side of the business, which is really powerful. So now if you just manage your e-commerce site effectively, underneath the covers, other people are coming up to the plate to take care of that stuff for you, to deliver your products to your customers. Really, really very powerful stuff. So I found some great research about e-commerce statistics to kind of help us put this in context. So 65% of shoppers look up price comparisons on their mobile device while in a physical store. Think about that. So what do you have to do there to intelligently optimize your business, to transform your business in a smart, data-driven way? Well, you need to be looking at prices of your competitors, of all these different products. That's not going to be easy to do manually. So you have to set up some kind of a schema where you're pulling data from these different competitors such that you can see in your own world what people are charging for all this. And you have to stay within certain boundaries. You can't charge too much more for this product or that just for convenience to buy it at the store, because guess what? People are looking on their smartphones and doing price comparisons while they're in the physical store. Right. Years and years ago, I actually heard a fun joke from a guy named Usama Fayyad, who was over at Yahoo for a long time. And way back when, they were able to use predictive models to kind of understand what people might buy, what people might not buy. And they realized that a lot of people were just using these models, using the predictions to optimize the process and then buying the product somewhere else. And he joked that to his client, we called those segments the bargain hunting bastards, because they were using this great analytical power and then giving the actual business to a competitor. So the point is, if you're going to optimize intelligently, if you're going to transform using business intelligence and using data, and you're in the e-commerce space, you really need to focus on pricing, because everyone is paying attention to that stuff. And I saw this one too. 81% of consumers conduct online research before making a purchase online. So what does that mean? It means you really need to optimize your e-commerce site. Remember, that's just a layer of abstraction under which you have connections to real assets somewhere that people buy. And it just gets drop shipped from Amazon or wherever. Lots and lots of companies do drop shipping these days that allows you to promote your brand while they're taking care of the hard stuff behind the scenes, right? Again, layers of abstraction. Very, very powerful. So 81% of consumers trust the advice of friends and family over businesses. Well, this is pretty interesting. So what does this mean for a business? With social data, which is abundantly available these days, hitting the Twitter API or hitting the Facebook API or hitting any number of APIs, you can kind of understand who influences whom. That's why we have this whole influencer world these days that helps us understand who are the key influencers in this market versus that market with this kind of product, that kind of product. So if you can understand what the, let's say, family and friends of high value prospects for your business are doing or recommending, if you can influence them, then you can influence your potential buyer. So if you're selling some high priced products, it really does behoove you to take a look at who out there is recommending this kind of product and see if you can influence them to better influence your prospects and transform intelligently. So what else? 80% of people stopped doing business with the company because of poor customer experience. 80%. It's all about the experience these days, the customer experience. And we know that people are impatient. You know, we said in the abstract, we talked about a paper that actually my co-presenter, Josh Parenteau, wrote, an article he wrote all about what's going on in this industry. And he kind of talks about how you really need to pay attention and dot your I's and cross your T's, basically, because if you are creating a bad experience for your customers, they're not going to come back. It's very easy to go from one website to another website. It's a lot harder to leave a physical store, drive across town, and go into a different store. So this is just another reality of doing business in the modern world, that guess what? People are impatient. And the other thing that Josh pointed out is that a lot of these consumer trends are really starting to shape the mindset of the enterprise. So we used to have this sort of bifurcation in our head of what it's like to be at work versus what it's like to be in the consumer world. And let's face it, that's changing because expectations are going up much higher now in terms of speed, how fast a website works, how well the functionality is underneath to get me the products and the services that I want. All of that is really, really important. Even Google and Google Docs. I use Google Docs every day. I love Google Docs. It changed the perception. It changed the expectation of the end user for what is possible, what is plausible, and what really needs to happen to stay in business. So, and this is another interesting stat, only 2.86% of e-commerce website visits can convert into a purchase. So 1 in 34 roughly. Now, maybe that's a lot of people doing research, but also it pays to pay attention to what people are doing on your site. So once again, we talked about using business intelligence and analytics to understand what's working and what's not working. There's been a tremendous amount of innovation in helping people understand who's on their website, where they're clicking, what they're doing, where they're going, how they're leveraging these technologies, which parts of the website, heat maps. One of the coolest visualizations I've seen is a heat map. So you can see exactly where people are clicking on your website. Sometimes it'll surprise you, but if you pay attention to that, you need to constantly be raising the bar, if you will, on that percentage. And just, it depends on which business you're in. And there's a lot of stuff to watch out for. Bots obviously create a lot of noise out there. Bots aren't real people. They're not actually buying anything. So it's good to be able to separate those out. This is another aspect of using these technologies, of using analytics to optimize your business. And it's not just in e-commerce, okay? So I found a great case study for NASDAQ using Looker for a single source of the truth. And she was talking about how in their compliance and security space, they have to pull all kinds of data from all kinds of different systems to see how they're performing against compliance, against regulations. And she said that before Looker, the process of pulling all the data together so they could get just kind of a clean view for a dashboard took about 30 hours. Now it's down to 1 to 2 hours. That's a lot faster. And that kind of speed makes real difference, because if you're trying to stay on top of something as severe as a regulation, if you're in the financial services business, if you're in the healthcare business, you need to be able to understand what's happening. You need an audit trail. And then, of course, you need to be able to change things to optimize what you're doing in your business. So the point of the story here is that these layers of abstraction, especially things like data modeling, for example, which is all about performance, can really help your business intelligently transform. And it's got to happen, folks. It has to happen. I think this whole COVID scare was just a straw in the wind. And we need to be very careful about really understanding what's important to our business, what's important to our customers and our prospects, and really focusing in on our high value customers, our high value prospects, making sure that we're serving them and that we're serving them well.
Thanks, Eric, and thanks everyone for joining. Hoping to spend a little bit of time building on some of the concepts that Eric laid out. I think the most relevant to us and for our customers is really this concept of abstraction. I've been obviously I work for Looker now, which is part of Google. I've worked for other vendors in the space. I actually spent some time at Gartner covering the market at a high level, sort of looking at different approaches that different vendors are taking, talking to a lot of clients. And I spent a number of years myself dealing with, BI deployments and managing BI programs. So I've worn a number of different hats kind of in the space. And, the concept of abstraction, I think, is, it's relatively new, because if you think about the way we went about BI for a long time, is to start with a database, right? Build a logical model, deploy that physical model, build a bunch of ETL scripts to get data into that data warehouse, put a semantic layer on top, and do reporting, right? That's kind of the mantra, and I think probably most people on this call are familiar with that sort of dynamic, and probably still have that today, managing kind of that long cycle of building and maintaining those things, the warehouse, ETL, the semantic layer, and reporting. What that does not offer is a level of abstraction. It doesn't really get you kind of the agility that you need in this day and age, and all the things that Eric pointed out around being able to service your customer in real time, understanding their needs and being able to take action really isn't supported by that model. I think when you think about the semantic layer, I think we had the right idea, right? That the whole point of that is to abstract the complexity of what's happening on the data side from business users and analysts who either don't need to know or don't really care to know about the complexity. So designed to give kind of a really business user friendly way to interact with a very complex set of data. The problem with it, though, is that it's not agile. And what you find, and this is where I think, Looker is pretty unique in our approach. We understand and totally agree with the value of that semantic layer, that abstraction layer. But what we encourage is for business rules and transformations to be represented once and referenced, throughout and not replicated. I think one of the things, and I'm just as guilty of this in my past lives, deploying older kind of traditional tools where, you start out with the intention of transforming everything in your ETL layer, and then you put stuff in the database. Well, doing that is a pretty long-winded process. So if a change is requested by someone, what's easier? Is it easier to do in your ETL, or maybe you just modify a database view? That same thing propagates through, the path of least resistance, then becomes the semantic layer. So you end up with some rules there. Worst case is you're building rules in individual reports and dashboards that users are using. So when you and we talk to customers all the time who are in this situation where they've got business rules just everywhere, right? They're in all of those above areas. They're doing some stuff in ETL, some stuff in the database, some things in the semantic layer, and some things in their front end reports. Obviously not ideal. So what we like to think about is, can we get to a point where our abstraction layer contains all of those business rules that makes it easy to serve up different user types, to solve different use cases, offer what we call different data experiences, some of which may well be reports and dashboards, but some may be custom applications, integrations with other tools. We'll talk more about that. But just that is really such a fundamental piece of Looker's philosophy and really how Looker started. I mean, this is fundamental to Looker's existence. The bet that was made 8 years ago now, where we said, building and forcing people to extract data from databases where they're storing their data and replicating that probably is not going to be the best architecture to scale and deliver deliver on growing data that's just growing exponentially. We're going to make a bet that we're going to have high performance scalable cloud databases, and the cost is just going to keep coming down. And here we are today. So I think it was the right bet to say we're not going to build an extract based architecture. We're going to go for the semantic layer kind of abstraction approach with that bet in mind. Now, Eric talked a little bit about cubes, and cubes, they definitely have their place, right? People are still using them. The reason you build a cube is to pre-aggregate, right, and deliver performance for questions that are known. So you optimize performance and you build cubes across dimensions and measures that people are gonna ask questions of. That's great if but I think there's this whole other end of the spectrum where you just don't know, and you can't put everything into a cube. So really, I think the vision is, can we offer an interface into all of your data that resides, maybe in BigQuery, maybe it's in AWS, maybe it's in Azure or Snowflake or anywhere. Can we offer a flexible, highly performant, scalable experience that doesn't force you to guess at what people want to ask and have to pre-aggregate? So that's kind of the vision. I'm going to jump into so transitioning a little bit to BI modernization. I've talked a lot about why why the traditional approach kind of has its limitations and weaknesses. Business, modernization, BI modernization and transformation is it's here. Like, I think there's no debating that we need to rethink the way we are using data in our organizations, no matter what industry we're in. And just some things, that we think about, that we hear from customers. I mean, obviously, last year, e-commerce was already a trend. E-commerce was already starting to disrupt before COVID. COVID just accelerated that by, anywhere from 4 to 6 years. So again, we're here. A lot of people were thinking about, how their companies are impacted and how their industry may change. It's probably changed. I think everyone kind of felt that. The next one is sort of thinking about the workplace. So 3 and 4 CFOs expect people to start working from home permanently. That's a huge departure from what we're used to. And, as Eric alluded to, I think, we are, I know I am sitting at the same desk that I, shop online at and pay bills at and, do everything in my personal life. I also sit right here and do things like this and other things for work. So the lines are kind of blurring, and that's really raised the bar in terms of where, I think where companies need to think about their employees more as customers rather than, just users of a system. So what are their needs? Like their expectations are elevating because they're used to experiences with consumer websites and applications. Those same expectations are flowing into the business world. And then obviously, business viability. I think every business has been tested last year, and it will continue to be. A lot of disruption happening. So who can stay ahead of the curve and fight off those disruptive trends and be at a place where they can adapt more in a more agile fashion as things kind of happen that are unexpected. And I mentioned this too. I think everyone's feeling this. I think everyone sort of feels that, why when I'm interacting with an online website, why am I getting, really relevant and timely recommendations or suggestions on what I should do? But yet when I'm at work trying to make a business decision, however tactical or strategic that may be, it seems that I don't get any of that. So that's what I mean by expectations are sort of merging, where we've kind of given our work lives a pass and said, well, it's we're at work and those are some of the limitations. I think that's kind of going away right now. So we, as I think every business needs to think of ways to adapt to meet these expectations that people are now bringing to us, and that's not going to change. Even if as things sort of go back to normal, whenever that may be. I think we are forever conditioned as employees to think of kind of our interactions with business data as consumers. So I always kind of think of this, and it's been I think people are still doing this, and it just sort of when you think about the flow of how BI has always sort of worked, it's always been about, let's get all of our data into a structure. Let's get it into a data warehouse. And then let's go and pick a tool to put on top of that, a reporting tool or dashboarding tool. There's plenty out there. And then finally, let's figure out what to do with it, right? So we've built this enormous monolithic thing. We've got a tool that, without even really knowing the requirements, seems to fit well with that. And now let's go figure out what we can do with it. That's kind of the backward approach, right? Because you don't even understand the problems you're trying to solve. You're building the solution, putting a lot of time and effort into architecting it, usually coming to find out that when you get to the point where you're actually delivering the solution to people, it's not what they want, or it's not what they need, or they need changes to it to make it usable. Then you're back to that really long cycle process of changing your ETL, changing your database, probably changing, or finding where your business rules even are and modifying them. So it's a really long cycle process. It just doesn't work. Now, data, I think, in terms of how we deliver that, certainly dashboards and reports aren't going anywhere. Obviously that's a big part of what our customers do with Looker. They build interactive dashboards. They deliver them to CXOs, analysts, even frontline teams. But I think the thing to think about is that is one, I would say, increasingly slimming piece of the pie when it comes to all the things you can do or should be able to do with a data platform. That is not your entire universe. And I know a lot of companies think that, once they've built a great KPI dashboard to share their metrics, or a operational report that gets distributed every day or week, that they're done. They've done BI. Modernization is really about thinking about, what other experiences are you missing out on? What user types, what use cases are you not delivering with BI? And we kind of bucket them into, again, what we call data experiences, where there's a trusted exploration use case. Your analysts need not necessarily dashboards, although they can use that as a starting point. But what they really want is to explore and ask their own questions. And when they get answers to questions, ask more questions. So kind of this dynamic of just really interrogating the data in a trusted engaging way to get the answers they need. Integrated insights. So this is one of the biggest ones. I feel like the industry's been talking about this for a long time, which is taking data and insights and making sure that you're putting it into the right hands of the right people at the right time. I would add in the right context of where they're working. So we see a lot of customers who are using Slack, for example. Everyone seems to be in Slack or a similar type of tool, where that's where they live all day. They're having conversations with their teams, having conversations around projects, being able to embed relevant insights and findings so that they don't have to leave that experience and go into a BI tool or open up a report or a dashboard. Being able to deliver that to the right team, to the right person in context is really how you get engagement. And that applies to much more than just Slack. I mean, obviously, if you think about your sales team and your organization, they probably live in Salesforce or another CRM tool all day. Wouldn't you want to deliver insights about their pipeline or open opportunities directly to where they're working? That's kind of what this one's all about. So the frontline, probably less technically savvy users who, again, no matter how easy we think we are making self-service or logging into a dashboard, they probably won't do it, probably because they really don't have time. They're doing their jobs. Custom applications. This one is it's a huge area, right, of just potential and opportunity to meet the needs of not only customers but partners, suppliers, depending on what industry you're in. And they can be, they're often very vertically oriented. So, depending on what industry you're in, there's a lot of opportunity to build custom, just purpose-built applications to solve problems for really external people to your organization. And then, I think one of the biggest gaps that BI has always had is sort of the bridging the gap from finding insights and taking action, right? There's been a lot of emphasis on finding trends, finding outliers, finding patterns, even coming up with prescriptive and predictive recommendations. But all of that is kind of meaningless unless you do something with it. So building, actions to do things like, on the screen right here, pausing a campaign. Maybe there's a alert that was triggered where, you're spending too much, you're spending a lot of money on a campaign that's not yielding the results, it's below a threshold. Being able to invoke action from the tool or from that, wherever your insight's being delivered, closes that gap. It closes the gap from insight to action. Again, that's where the impact is going to be felt. So I've talked about this before, but again, the kind of the inverse of the start with data, pick a tool and deliver to your users. If we flip that on its head and think about, what do our consumers, our employees need, right? So taking kind of an individual consumer-centric approach gets you a bottoms-up assessment of what you need to deliver. So again, working that backwards and taking all of the needs and all of the requirements and all the things that people need to do their jobs better, make better decisions, boil up into, okay, what kind of tool do I need? What sort of analytic capabilities do they need to accomplish those things? And then that drives your architecture on the data side. So it's completely backwards. And when you kind of say it that way and look at it that way, that's how you would solve any problem, right? Understanding the problem and then architecting a solution. It's just a kind of a crazy dynamic in the BI world that we've not really ever done this. But I do think it is the key to transformation. When you think about, this is all about making better business decisions, transforming the way you make those decisions, and optimizing and modernizing your business processes. You have to start here. I don't know how else you would do it without really understanding the decisions that are made and how people are doing it and how to make them better. Just a little bit more. I've alluded to this throughout, but BI is a thing that we do, that Looker does, and that I think it kind of encompasses what most people think of in BI. It's reports and dashboards. It's this trusted exploration experience, and I'll talk a little bit about what we mean by that. Because if you think about the word modern BI, I think most people think of probably data visualization, self-service exploration, self-service BI, and those are all incredibly important. What they've often done, though, is kind of thrown governance out the window, where they basically said, the semantic-based approach that traditional platforms have used is great for governance, but it's too limiting. It doesn't offer self-service. So we swung the pendulum. This is probably over the last decade or so. We've swung the pendulum all the way to the other end and said people need self-service. So let's give them that. And we kind of created a mess for ourselves where we don't really have a lot of governance, but we do have people who can self-serve, rapid prototype, and all of that. So what we're trying to do is sort of bridge that gap. Deliver governance in a trusted way. We do that through our LookML data modeling layer, our abstraction layer, but give people the ability to explore trusted data, right? So they know that the data sets that have been provisioned, curated for them are trusted. They are right, and they can ask and answer their own questions. So there is definitely a distinction there. But I think where it gets really interesting is thinking about this concept of beyond BI. And if you go and probably in some of your organizations, I know there's a lot of organizations out there who, when you start to talk about things like operationalizing workflows or integrating data into applications and portals and building custom applications, the initial reaction is, well, that's not BI. That's not part of our program. That belongs to so and so, or it's just not done. I think with Looker, there's an opportunity to sort of think about these things all under that one umbrella of, because that unified platform, that abstraction layer, can serve up different users, different personas, and deliver them different experiences from that one interface. It kind of redefines what you can do with BI. So I think that's, just I think one takeaway here is don't constrain sort of the notion of BI and modernizing BI as being, me taking some reports and dashboards that live over here, rebuilding them over here in another platform, and I'm done. That might be step one, but I think, getting that modern foundation allows you to do much more than we've really ever been able to do in the past. Now you may be asking, well, I've spent a lot of time and, money and effort building out my BI deployment, right? Whatever tool that is, why can't I just use that to deliver data experience, the data experiences that we've talked about? I think what a lot of companies find is that if they try to do that, they're going down the path of sort of building silos where, sure, you could deliver custom applications, you can start to embed and operationalize workflows, but probably not from within the same experience or the same platform. And why traditional BIs aren't designed for that, right? They're not really designed for scale. They weren't built in an era where we had MPP, columnar databases. We just didn't, right? They weren't designed for cloud. They weren't designed for agility, right? They were designed for governance to be rock solid. They weren't designed with, oh, my business user might ask for a change today and I need to have that in tomorrow. How am I going to do that? Really not optimized for it. They weren't designed for limited for multiple experiences. They were designed for kind of a one size fits all. This mantra that a report is BI or a dashboard is BI. That is, I think, kind of narrow in terms of what we can do and what the potential is. And then lock in. A lot of most platforms just aren't extensible, so you can't do. You can't extend, you can't integrate other technology easily into the environment. So just some examples. Again, I'm sure many people on this webinar are familiar with a lot of this and have kind of been living in that dynamic, and this is probably not unfamiliar territory. And again, thinking about this unifying platform and sort of what it delivers, it is it does leverage a cloud investment. I think one of the most frustrating things that I hear is, for customers who feel like, because the architecture of whatever BI tool they're using forces them down the path of extracting from a very high performant analytic database and putting it somewhere else just so they can do analytics on top of that. That's not ideal. I don't think anyone would voluntarily sign up for an architecture that requires you to do that, but that's the position a lot of people find themselves in because of past decisions they made. I mean, I think the way to think about this is your BI tool should not dictate your data strategy. It shouldn't dictate your architecture. It should fit within it. And I think that's really kind of one of the principles that we have. Whatever environment you're using, whatever database, whether that's BigQuery again, or Snowflake or Redshift or whatever, those decisions are yours, and those decisions are made based on a lot of different factors. I think one of the real benefits, and this has come up in a number of customer conversations, the benefit of being able to change easily without impacting your users because of the abstraction layer, I don't think can be overemphasized. So, I don't know how many people would raise their hand if I said, whatever cloud environment you're using today, can you guarantee me that in 3 years, that's going to be the same? That if you're on your Redshift today or BigQuery today, that you will 100% guarantee me that won't change. I don't see many CTOs or CDOs or CIOs that are willing to say that, because cost is obviously a factor, and there's certainly a lot of competition in the cloud database space. If you did want to make a change from one of those databases to another, having an abstraction layer that decouples the data from the logic makes that extremely easy. And we've seen customers who've gone from that exact scenario where they were using, Snowflake, and they said, well, AWS is our preferred database environment, even though we've been doing our pilot and prototyping on Snowflake. How hard would it be to cut that over to Redshift? And it's simple, and there's no impact to end users. So think about that as you think about the concept of future proofing and how your data strategy and architecture may shift. It will likely shift. Scalable and lightweight, right? There's no desktop component. There's no client management, any of that. Talked a lot about the governance layer. I think that is kind of the bread and butter that enables everything we've talked about that makes this so different. Administration and just extensibility, being able to embed, being able to build these really, really customized experiences and applications from the single platform is huge. And it serves two, I think, very distinct user types, right? It's for IT and data teams, people who are used to the traditional model, right? Building out a data warehouse and doing all the instantiation of a semantic layer. This is not that foreign to them, right? This is it sounds like all the things they want to accomplish, just in a different, more modern, more agile way. So IT and data teams, I think, really can typically grasp the benefit of, wow, this is a I'm not really sacrificing anything. I'm able to solve all the problems I need to solve in just a better way for me and my end users. And then app developers, again, if you can build an application for your customers that rely on the same business rules, the same underlying data that your analysts are using to analyze data, all the better, right? You're not creating these silos that just increase the overhead in terms of management and just the burden and cost of deploying. And just I'll close on this slide, just some examples. We've got lots of examples of, the ones you would expect when you think about modernization. There's customers who have just found greater efficiencies, right? Because they're not in this endless cycle of being, quote unquote order takers, where their work is just managing ETL flows and making database changes. They're actually doing just more business focused, higher value work, partnering with their users to understand what the needs are and delivering those solutions that they know have value. So Stripe is an example. They're doing what I mentioned earlier, embedding content within Salesforce. So their reps, again, where they are every day, they're consuming analytics. They're consuming, recommendations about how they should structure their day. What are high risk opportunities? Where should they spend? Where should they prioritize and spend more time with a prospect? Those sorts of things. Future Play's a good one. Future Play's an interesting one where they automated some of their processes to, where in the past decisions were being made by an employee, by a person, and now they're basically they're introducing bots to optimize spend. So there's thresholds and triggers that are set where, depending on how an ad is performing, they adjust what they're willing to spend up or down based on that. So they're doing that in a very automated way. That's an example of just operationalizing data into work streams, again, that may have been very manual or didn't have that sort of rigor or intelligent kind of decision making happening previously. And then global payments, again, just building. This is one of many examples of customers who are building portals and just really, really engaging experiences. Back to the beginning of what Eric was talking about around, this has got to be the focus: customer experience, user experience. It's really easy to find someone else, right? If you're in an online retailer's experience, your patience is probably very low for a bad user experience. If you can't find something, or if it's frustrating, there's 10 more. So I think this is really elevating the importance of building engaging customer experiences, and a lot of customers have done that with Looker.
We have a couple good questions here from the audience. Let me throw this one over to you. One of the attendees is asking, what facilities are there to keep the Looker metadata and data dictionary synchronized for consistency with, for example, an enterprise data dictionary over time? And of course, that's got me thinking about data catalogs, right? I mean, we've had this desire for business dictionaries for, 40 years or so, but now, like in the last 5 years, that has really matured significantly. So what can you say about reconciling this metadata with data dictionaries of various types?
Yeah, I mean, so we haven't built a native data dictionary or data catalog within Looker, but I talked about extensibility and integrations with other technology. So we have customers who are building integrations with Calibra, for example. If that's the data catalog that they're using, across their enterprise, certainly build integrations with that. Elation's another one. So there's, I think for now, we're really relying on the tech partner and integration capabilities that we built, again, because of the extensibility with Looker.
Yeah, as I was listening to your presentation, I'm thinking to myself just how fast business moves these days. I mean, COVID was a perfect example for a forcing function to dramatically change just about everything out there. I heard one story of an e-commerce company. They were primarily brick and mortar. They sold something like 7% of their products through e-commerce. And then within 3 months or 4 months of COVID hitting, they were selling 70% online. So that's a huge change. And what I like about the Looker approach is the ability, and maybe if you go into some detail here for how it actually works, but the ability to see across different systems, right? Because in the old days, in the sort of waterfall approach, we would design the schema, build the data model, start pulling all this data into the warehouse, and build an OLAP cube. And the point is, from the business perspective, from 0 to 60 took like weeks, for example. But what you're able to do with Looker ML and reaching across these different environments is greatly expedite that process. I mean, obviously implementation still takes time, but we're talking days instead of weeks and months, right? Can you talk about how that happens?
Yeah, I mean, and this gets back to sort of how I started with talking about where your business rules live, right? So in a perfect world, in Looker, and you've got all your business rules sort of centralized, right there. You know where everything is. You know where all of those rules are. It allows you, because we're decoupled from the underlying data, if something changed, if one of your definitions of a of a product category or some definition of a metric changes, in the old world, you would have to know everywhere where that thing lived. You'd have to know where the transformation and work happens so you could adjust it. You probably have to reprocess cubes. You probably have to reload your warehouse or incrementally refresh it, and then upload and update everything else that's downstream. With Looker, again, because it's a layer, you make that one change in the business in the modeling layer, it propagates everywhere in real time because you're not rerunning anything, right? There's no extract, there's no cube. The data is as real time as it's going to be. So anyone who refreshes that report or is in the dashboard sees that instantaneously. Even bigger than that, though, I think the ability to build rules on top of rules and reference kind of that central definition where if the core definition of gross margin has to be universally agreed upon by every user, but my use of it requires me to augment it even further because I need to add something into it, or I need to do some tweak that makes it a little bit different than what everyone else is using. I simply reference the centralized blessed version, and if that changes, so does mine. So it propagates all the way through. That's really powerful. So that's thinking about kind of how you want to architect your system and really taking advantage of that abstraction and making sure that you're set up for success there.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I'm glad we kind of explored abstractions and the power of abstractions, but you made a couple of really good points there, which is to say that everyone has their own view of the world and their own need to understand data in a particular way. And if you allow the end user to build their own rules to solve some of these issues on the view that everyone else is sharing, that way you don't distort what someone else sees, right? They can still see it the way they want. You can see it the way you want. I mean, it used to take all sorts of calisthenics to get there, but now you can get there because of this layer of abstraction, right?
Exactly. And what you avoid is someone building a rule or an object or defining a metric outside of your purview, right? And that's what happens a lot. It obviously happens in Excel all the time, right? Where you have no oversight, no governance, you don't know what people are doing. Here you do. And it does give you flexibility. It gives users with specific needs flexibility to build on that definition without creating those silos and creating these shadow IT, for lack of a better word, deployments that circumvent any governance that you're trying to implement as an IT leader.
That's great. We got a couple real detailed questions coming in. One of the attendees is asking if a change or update to a risk model is made, can you determine exactly where and how the calculation change was made? I'm pretty sure the answer there is yes, right?
Yeah, I think it would depend on sort of what you're looking for in terms of what the change is. But yeah, I mean there definitely are ways of detecting and flagging and noting that. Again, devil's in the detail, but yes, theoretically that is possible. It's a great question.
Okay, and Looker connects to all kinds of different databases, right? Like in terms of what Looker can tap into, it's any number of different databases. And do you know how many total, what the total list is, or how many roughly?
It's over 50 SQL dialects now. So really any SQL compliant database we connect to. I mean, obviously, If it's a Teradata on-prem database, we work fine against that. The optimization and benefit of in-database performance, naturally occurs better in the cloud. So, we work with a lot of customers who are on BigQuery, on Snowflake, on Redshift, who have great success. Again, that's not limited to those three, but we see those most often. Just because, and this is the broader concept or the broader topic of modernization. Most people are thinking of modernization not just as my BI tool. That's one piece of it. It's bigger than that. It's data modernization. So how can I go from that on-prem kind of rigid database construct or data warehouse construct to something in the cloud that offers agility? The natural question that follows is, now what can I do with it, right? And I always go back to, if all you're doing is replicating a Teradata data warehouse that's on-prem or an Oracle data warehouse, putting that in the cloud and not changing anything fundamentally with what you're doing with it, you really haven't modernized. You modernized the architecture and the technology you're using, but you haven't modernized in terms of transforming, right? You're not addressing new use cases. So I think that is one of just, I always look for that when we're talking to customers, where if that's their goal, to sort of lift and shift and take reports or take a database and put it in the cloud, that's a foundational step, but that's not the end, right? That's kind of the start line.
Well, and I think, too, one of the really cool benefits here of taking this approach is that you've recognized, and I remember taking a briefing from Looker way back in the earliest days, quite frankly, I think probably 7 years ago, maybe, taking a briefing and understanding what was being built. And I thought it was very clever because it recognizes that the world is heterogeneous and that is always going to be the case. Right. I mean, there were years when we saw, in particular, the big guys, SAP, IBM, Oracle, talk about, what do they call it? Standardization was the term that they threw out there. Like, oh, just use our stack. Don't worry about the other people. And that's just not reality. And that's not going to be reality going forward, even in the cloud, because, of course, Amazon is a big player. Google, of course, is very serious about cloud. Microsoft has done tremendous things in the last few years. So that heterogeneity is never going to go away. And the key is to be able to reach into these different environments and then pull together a meaningful view of the world. And that's what the girl from NASDAQ was talking about, being able to pull all this information very quickly, do your analysis, and not have to worry so much about this change or that change, because you're looking at the strategic view. Is that about right, Josh?
It totally is. And I hit on another thing there around sort of the stack centricity of the mega vendors, right? The IBM and SAP, with once you're in. And we have, if we, Looker and Google, have really, really embraced multi-cloud, right? Looker's always been a multi-cloud solution, as I've talked about. Looker was a BigQuery partner before the acquisition. We've worked really well with Snowflake. We've worked with AWS. So that is not changing, right? And Google as well, with things they're doing with Omni and the multi-cloud investments they're making. I think that does differentiate our approach from a data and analytics perspective relative to what people are used to with, I'm buying into a vendor. I'm buying into, whatever SAP is doing, I need to do that wall to wall, or Microsoft, I'm wall to wall Microsoft. The concept of wall to wall, it could be your decision if that's what you want, but I think flexibility and the ability to change and adapt is really high value now.
Yeah, you're cracking me up because I'm thinking about the Seinfeld episode where he's talking about the carpeting wall to wall, right? That was the old dream that people have, was the wall to wall carpeting, right? I'm a hardwood floors guy myself, but that's very funny.
The doing this show.
So a number of really good questions here, and folks, if we don't get to all of them, I'll be sure to pass these on to our speaker today. But one of the attendees asked a pretty interesting question: can Looker reports reflect content according to data definitions as they were last year from a data dictionary? In other words, sort of point in time kind of thing, or does it have to be reproduced now as opposed to the old version?
So every look, we call them a look, but think of it as a visualization or a report, is a unique URL, right? Which allows you to do sort of a point in time capture. So if I ran a querying right now against against a database, that URL is specific to that sort of representation of the view. I can make changes to that every time I render that. It creates a new unique URL. That I don't think addresses I think what the question's being asked is, can you almost look at like a snapshot of data? So the data that as it looked a year ago, can I go back to that? You really can't, right? Because we don't extract data. We don't extract and sort of tag it with a timestamp and say this is how it was last quarter or the quarter before that. That's one of, I think, the trade-offs of having all of the data residing in the warehouse, right? It's in the warehouse. So really that's not kind of what Looker's designed to do.
Okay, yeah, that's a good answer. I think you're right. Here's another good comment from an attendee. And by the way, someone else has commented they like your definition of modernization. And I think you're correct about that, right? You don't want to just lift and shift. You need to really take a look at what you're building and what the purpose is. But This is a kind of a fun comment to just riff on. An attendee writes, thank you. In healthcare, risk adjustment models are applied and used in financial projections. So the C-suite knows how their financial projections change when a risk model update is applied, like let's say COVID, or let's say the vaccine gets rolled out for COVID. You want to be able to very quickly adjust those models and then do some forecasting on what kind of revenue you're going to get, what kind of expenses you're going to have, all that kind of stuff. It just kind of speaks to the need to be as agile as possible. And again, that's what I like about this model, because you can reach across into these different environments, get that strategic view, and very quickly update things and very quickly know what is the shift going to cause for our bottom line. Right, Josh?
Yeah, exactly. And when it comes to things like, predictive models, I mean, a lot of those things, at least where we sit right now from a product perspective, we're relying on integrations with other tools that specialize in that. So to build predictive models, for example. So a lot of times Looker is sort of the, kind of the intermediary, right? Where the data that is fed into that model comes from Looker because it's, it's trusted. We know it's governed. It's a feed. The model does its thing, and it gives back, or it writes back the results of that. So back to the question sort of about lineage and can I sort of tell what happened, you sort of can, but you can't get the details in terms of what you would get from the tool itself building and maintaining the model. So that, that's one area where I think as we look at roadmap opportunities and what we're going to leverage from Google and all the things they do on the AI and ML side, we'll see more and more of that. But it definitely is, right now it's reliant heavily on tools specializing in forecasting and modeling. And again, you see those results surface through Looker.
Okay, good. And one final question, a really good detailed one that I'm curious about myself. One of the attendees is asking, does the URL hold the variable values within the URL itself? Like, can you tell which variables are in the string?
Yes. Yeah, it's a exact, if I were to send you a URL of something I just ran today, it would show the exact rendition of that. So it would show the whatever filters, whatever you've done to create that, it's visible to you. So it's not just a screenshot of the output. It does show everything that goes into it.
I love it. Well, folks, we do archive all these webinars for later viewing. Hop online to insideanalysis.com. That's where we post all the archives. Fantastic presentation today, Josh. Thank you so much for really putting some detail in there to help people understand how this all works. But like I've said before, I love the approach of creating this meta language that can absorb different types of SQL. Is very, very clever, solves all kind of problems out of the box, and really is useful in this new heterogeneous world, because it's not going to change. There's going to be all kinds of updates, all kinds of innovations. And you even use the title of our show, Future Proof. You want to future proof your architecture, future proof your analytics, because things are changing very rapidly and we've got to stay on top of it. Even in our business, we're a tiny business. We've had to innovate using new technologies, using new techniques. The customer behavior, the consumer behavior is changing all the time. Everything is changing. So thanks again, Josh, for your time. This does conclude our live webinar. We'll catch up to you next time, folks. Take care.